Inaka Yuji felt deeply tired and no longer saw the point in continuing his work, so he briefly considered returning to the village. However, almost immediately a warning sounded nearby that such a decision could lead to serious danger. Then Alfred abruptly confirmed the risk and insistently demanded that the vehicle be removed from the road, without allowing for any unnecessary hesitation or delay. After that, the driver only responded briefly, and Alfred explained that he pushed himself to the limit with excessive workload. At that very moment, a strange flying silhouette appeared above the buildings, and a voice inside him noted that both of them had been working themselves to the point of exhaustion for some time. Meanwhile, Mina called out to him and reproachfully reminded him that he had fallen asleep again in such an inappropriate place, as if it had become a habit. Then Eleanor asked if his eye hurt, and was told he was simply recovering from sleep. He then explained he was only taking a short break and, out of habit, called her Big Sister. Afterwards, the girl asked if their mother ever took him outside, and then added that she'd come to take him home. His only response was a puzzled interjection, as if the thought hadn't yet had time to form. Then she asked him directly what was happening to him. At that moment, a memory flashed back. He was once known as Inaka Yuji, an ordinary Japanese office worker who died under the wheels of a truck on the street. After that, the girl with her hair pulled back into a ponytail tugged him along, finally inviting him back. Meanwhile, the long-haired companion added that his mother was very worried, and he quietly expressed his regret for the inconvenience. Then the grown woman looked at him closely, noticing his haggard expression, and cautiously asked if everything was all right. In response, he admitted that, despite being only 3 years old, he was genuinely tired, having been a worn-out employee in his past life. After this, Alfred explained that he was training in magic because he had the ability to use it and considered it necessary. She then shared that after casting the spell she felt weak, but sleep usually quickly restored her strength. In response, he advised her to go outside occasionally and strengthen her body through movement. A moment later, the girl remembered how her older sister had once told her she'd been forced to the river. He immediately asked if that had also been her mother's decision. To this, Eleanor replied that everything had stemmed from her sister's good intentions. After that, he noted that yesterday's nap had been disrupted, and along with it, his magical exercises, and without further ado, he made it clear that she was the cause. Then she muttered that she was beginning to see her sister as a real demon, and then reminded her that magic actually exists in this world. After that, she suggested they waste no time and move on. Then an elderly man appeared before him, calmly explaining that this place was not Earth, and directly addressing Inaka Yuji, informing him that he had died in his former world. He added that, according to earthly laws, certain formalities usually follow death. After this, the chief clarified that, for some unknown reason, the boy's soul had ended up in the wrong world, a situation he had never encountered before. He warned that returning would be impossible, and upon hearing a surprised confirmation, explained that he would instead be reborn here. The young man then expressed gratitude for the opportunity, but cautiously questioned whether a world inhabited by monsters wasn't too dangerous. In response, the elder confidently declared that there would be no problems, told him not to worry, and suddenly asked if the other man could read minds. After this, the deity reminded him of his true status, and the boy admitted he'd momentarily lost sight of it. Then it became clear that there were people in this world, just like on Earth, but science was undeveloped here, and everything was built around magic, while demons regularly attacked settlements. Then he thought that if reincarnation was really possible, he would like to live a calm, measured life, and he couldn't help but wonder whether it would be possible to find true peace in such a reality. In conclusion, the chief confidently said there was no need to worry, as he would be handing over a valuable specimen, a truly rare material. He then added that as the first visitor from another world, he would receive something incredible, along with a new life, which caused the young man to react with a wary, questioning look. The young man calmly explained that even after death, he still had no choice. The old man nodded in agreement and confirmed that reincarnation was inevitable and impossible to avoid. After this, the boy declared that he wanted to live happily in the new world. His interlocutor chuckled, noticing his surprising carefree demeanor and sudden mood swings, and then heard the question about what exactly he would become after his reincarnation. Then the suggestion was made. If he so desired, he could be made the crown prince or the eldest son of a noble family, and the young interlocutor thoughtfully responded that since he was being reincarnated, the boy then reasoned that in this case he would not have to worry about food and housing, but immediately noted that life in a high-born family could turn out to be too troublesome and burdened with responsibilities. Afterwards, he expressed his gratitude for the concern. The boss calmly remarked that he seemed to have no particular desires or aspirations, so he would make the decision himself, adding magical abilities and ancient magic as a bonus. Then the boy on the right could not hide his surprise at the mention of magic, and the one standing on the left confidently declared that he would indeed be able to use it and that this was something to be happy about because after all he was standing before a god. After that, the boy's thoughts raced wildly. He imagined himself soaring through the sky like a bird, then imagined summoning magic and creatures that could assist him in his daily affairs. Gradually, the idea of monsters being able to work for him became especially enticing, and he suddenly realized that such creatures could indeed be useful. Then he said that in his past life there was no fundamental difference for him, but now he has only one goal: to live happily and peacefully somewhere in the rural wilderness. After this, the boy thought hopefully that such a place must exist. The old man asked for a little time to think, and then reacted unexpectedly, as if he had suddenly found a suitable option. Then Eleanor told him about a village surrounded by nature where one could be born as a lord's second son. Upon hearing this, the boy immediately asked to be reborn there, openly expressing his interest. After this, the man asked what other form of magic he would like to receive and suggested adding something else. In response, the young man calmly replied that he had no objection and asked for a minute to think. He then fell into thought, admitting that choosing something truly amazing was difficult. Options for offensive magic, healing and defense floated through his mind, all of which reminded him of the difficult ability selection process in a game. After this, the boy confidently declared that he intended to live a relaxed life, and the ability to use magic would only make it more comfortable. He added that he planned to settle in the village as the son of a lord and wanted a skill that would offset the downsides of rural life. The man then explained that Kolyat's level of culture was comparable to that of medieval Europe on Earth. Hearing this, the boy remarked that wild boars and bears roamed the area around the village, and that a skill that could damage them would be quite useful. He also inquired if there were any demons nearby, noting that this all resembled natural disasters, just like in his previous world, and that he wished to remain a simple man. He then reasoned that with a low level of culture, transportation would also be underdeveloped, meaning there would be no bicycles or cars. He asked if there was such a thing as magic for transportation. At that moment, the girl asked if he had made his decision, and the boy politely addressed the deity. After this, the man asked about long-distance magic and suddenly noticed the table appear, wondering how it had come into being. The elder calmly explained that spatial magic allows instantaneous travel to almost any point in the world and is an ancient enchantment. Upon hearing this, he unhesitatingly asked to be granted precisely this power. The old man then remarked that such magic would be ideal for village life and asked if the young man was ready to travel to the new world. The answer was a confident yes. After this, Alfred sincerely thanked for everything and for every decision made, without going into unnecessary words. The boss waved him off, saying it wasn't that big of a deal, and said goodbye. At that moment, the boy looked up in surprise, noticing something above him. Then the boy thought about how to use magic in general and wondered what exactly he needed to do. He remembered that spatial magic required only a small amount of effort, and heard the admonition to try his best. After some hesitation, he agreed, but immediately repeated the word effort in his mind again, trying to understand its meaning. Inaka Yuji finally gave up and decided to keep things simple. Thus began his new quiet life in the countryside, where the past was finally behind him and a slow, measured journey lay ahead. The baby, out of habit, thought he needed to get up urgently or he'd be late for work, but then he felt a bright light and realized it was morning. Then a strange realization dawned on his mind: he was only a week old, and his previous worries no longer made sense. The narrative then clarified the setting. The action takes place in the village of Kolyat, located in the kingdom of Misfilt. Here lives Alfred Slolit, the feudal lord's second son, who is now 3 years old, though his inner age is much older. Afterward, he noted that the most rewarding thing about being able to walk independently was his ability to do so. Even though he sometimes stumbled and fell, just being able to move without assistance felt like a real accomplishment. Meanwhile, the past surfaced in his memory. He was once 27-year-old Inaka Yuji, living in a completely different world and time. After this, the thought continued. In that life, he was the most ordinary office worker, not standing out in any way until a tragic accident cut his path short. Then a conversation with the chief surfaced, explaining that his soul had been transported to a world where magic existed. Alfred recalled this while looking at the image of the planetary system, as if trying to comprehend the scale of the change. After this, it became clear that the Slolit family consisted of a father and mother, an older sister and brother, each of whom had already become part of his new reality. The girl later said that the constant conversations around her helped her gradually master the language of this world. Despite her infant body, Inaki Yuji's consciousness remained within her all this time, allowing her to understand much more than appeared from the outside. Mina watched with interest as the baby crawled, calling it a marvelous sight. Meanwhile, he was rapidly learning to roll over and move around the bed again, involuntarily recalling skills from his past life. Afterwards, she noticed that Alfred was constantly holding a book and asked why. He explained that the time he couldn't walk had been particularly difficult, and reading had become his only salvation. He then added that those around him probably thought he was odd because of his love of books. Besides, the only time he had time to practice magic was during the hours spent lying in bed. A little later, Eleanor remarked that the wind was particularly pleasant today. He responded with a soft whine, then remarked that the clean air of this world was noticeably different from Japan's, and sighed deeply. Afterwards, he announced that he planned to read the sequel to that very book that day. At that moment, the girl greeted Alfred warmly, as if it were part of their usual routine. Then Silvio Slolet asked if he'd come to read too. He admitted that some parts remained unclear, but the story was still captivating, which genuinely surprised Silvio. Afterwards, the chief calmly assured her that everything would be fine, as the girl was a quick learner, and that she could always turn to him if she had any questions. She thanked him, and Mina noted with surprise that he was only 6 years old, marveling at his calm. He replied that he had no right to judge others. Meanwhile, the boy admitted that, unlike Eleanor, he had no desire to go outside to practice fencing. She, on the contrary, enthusiastically urged him to go practice in the fresh air. After this, she added that Silvio Neeson is kind, quiet and actually a very good person, as if trying to dispel possible doubts. Then Alfred noticed that the weather was truly wonderful today. He silently thought that perhaps he should pay a visit to his secret base this afternoon. After that, he focused on spatial magic and movement, holding the object in his hands and imagining the point where it should go. An inner voice persistently urged him to maintain concentration. Finally, he threw a stone, which unexpectedly landed right on the table. Several objects around him immediately began to teleport through the air, confirming that his slow but sure life in a new world was only just beginning. The girl's eyes widened and she couldn't hide her admiration, calling what was happening incredible. In response, the boy calmly remarked that for a deity, such a thing was entirely expected, as if everything had happened exactly as it should. He then added that he was able to manage it freely, and was surprised at how easily it all worked. However, almost immediately he let out a tired sigh, feeling the tension building up inside him. Then out of nowhere, came the explanation that it was a good thing he trained beforehand and built up his magical energy reserves. The young man reacted with genuine surprise and immediately demanded an explanation of what magical power even was. He then asked why God was nearby, and was immediately astonished by what was happening, insisting on an explanation. The chief explained that they were now inside his dream, apologized for the intrusion, and added that the reincarnation had gone smoothly. Upon hearing this, the boy noticed he was seeing himself on the screen. Afterwards, Mina explained that mastering spatial magic, regardless of talent, requires a huge reserve of energy. She warned him that his current magical powers were insufficient to fully utilize this ability, which frankly surprised him. Then the man with the bandage on his head suggested calming down and not panicking. He explained that there was a way to increase the limit of magical power. The boy at the table felt relieved, and another participant in the conversation remarked that such things should have been explained before the reincarnation. After this, a detailed explanation was given. To expand the magical energy limit, one must completely expend it, then replenish it to the limit, and repeat this cycle over and over again. To restore it, it turned out, simply sleeping was enough. Hearing this, the boy noted that since childhood he had given all his strength without reserve and was mentally prepared for such a path, as if such a burden did not frighten him at all. He then added that thanks to this, he didn't have to worry about carrying things or cleaning, but most importantly, he considered it would now be much easier to escape from Eleanor, which almost sounded like a strategic advantage. Afterwards, Alfred remarked that it was a shame she had been one of the reasons for such decisions. He then acknowledged that he now had to learn the rules of spatial magic, and after a moment's thought, he concluded, "Fine, so be it." He then said that this would be quite suitable and attempted to lift the stone. Feeling its weight, he immediately noticed that the object was quite heavy. After that, he declared that they needed to act quickly. Then followed a teleportation spell, and he vanished along with the large stone, leaving no trace behind. A moment later he reappeared, looking back and confidently declaring that everything had gone well. At that very moment, a massive stone crashed onto the table with a loud thud. Then the man took the leaf in his hand and said he would be next. The boy looked at his palms and declared that he now understood everything, while in the background, a small flame flickered faintly on a large stone. Alfred then explained that the larger and heavier an object, the more magical energy is required to move it. He added that this was obvious and required no further explanation. Then he thought for a moment and said that perhaps it would be worth trying something living. After that, he looked around and asked if there was a suitable creature nearby. He soon clarified that the insect they'd found wasn't a rhinoceros beetle at all, but a different species, not found on Earth. The fork-eared beetle introduced itself and, with an air of importance, declared it an honor to be the first living creature to test ancient magic. After this, the boy clearly pronounced the teleportation command, and the beetle instantly disappeared, successfully transported. He praised the result, and the other observer reacted with surprised exclamations. At the same moment, the boy on the right noticed with bewilderment that there was a spoon in front of him and simultaneously sensed something strange. On the left, an insect was flying nearby, buzzing, as if accompanying him. He then hastily apologized and begged the spoon bug not to harm him, but it continued to advance aggressively. He despairingly wondered if the creature considered him a mate and noted that the chase continued for another 30 minutes. Later, he recounted how he had managed to use teleportation on himself and was once again amazed at the astonishing power of spatial magic. The guy noticed that it all turned out to be much more complicated than he expected, and he wondered if the object had appeared right in the air and then simply fell to the ground without any logic. After this, he explained that his first successful teleportation had occurred only a couple of months ago, and since then he had gradually come to understand the hidden rules by which this magic works. Meanwhile, Mina threw a small ball, which landed on the table. She then gave a command, but nothing happened, and she immediately concluded that without the right conditions, it was completely useless. He then calmly explained that he could only move objects with which he was in direct physical contact. Furthermore, it was impossible to teleport individual parts of an object or person, meaning that destroying things in this manner would be impossible. After this, the guy admitted that he would like to test teleportation on other people, but first he would need their consent, so he is not sure whether such an idea will even be possible to implement. At that moment, Eleanor mentioned that since it was so hot outside, they could bring out the ice. Hearing this, Alfred exclaimed in surprise, and the girl addressed her elder sister with respect. He then muttered that she definitely wouldn't knock. Eleanor calmly remarked that next time it would be better to warn her. He responded by saying that she could at least have knocked since he was seriously scared, but she dismissed it as a trifle. Afterwards, Alfred threatened that if something like this happened again, he would teleport something onto her head the moment she walked in. He added that he could put ice in her clothes or even move the shelf in front of the door to prevent her from getting in. Then the girl became indignant, asking why he was even doing that when he was supposed to be her sweet 3-year-old little brother. He responded by explaining that she looked like she was deliberately plotting to annoy him. After that, she wondered how he knew such complex words, and he honestly admitted he'd read them in a book. Then she told him to just bear with it, because being a younger brother wasn't easy. He repeated the word ice several times in response, until she finally agreed and clarified that she specifically wanted an ice cube. Afterwards, the chief explained that ice magic is considered a higher form of magic. In a world where water magic exists, cooling methods are extremely limited, so anything that can impart cold is considered indispensable. Alfred added that he had been training non-stop, admitted the workload was strenuous, but declared that he had managed it. Then the girl clarified that she wasn't talking about that kind of ice at all. He asked if she meant the same kind they'd eaten before. She explained that she was talking about fluffy, crunchy ice, which left him genuinely surprised. After that, Mina started talking about how the dessert needed to be both airy and crispy. Eleanor asked if she was talking about slush, and the long-haired girl immediately confirmed her guess. Then he realized there was no other way out and reached out to the table. A girl stood nearby, clearly excited, and then scattered glittering dust. He couldn't help but let out a delighted exclamation as he watched the glittering particles slowly descend around him. Afterwards, she explained that each piece was tiny and added that Alfred was doing a pretty good job. He responded hesitantly, admitting that perhaps that was true. The guy then remarked that she was usually rather tactless and lacking in tact. She responded by saying that if she had genuinely praised him, he would probably have been even more embarrassed. After that, the girl decided that was enough. He asked if everything was ready and received a vague but affirmative answer. Then Eleanor confidently declared that Alfred was ready for any challenge. He announced that the ice chips were ready and that he had spoons. He then added that he kept them specifically for teleportation practice. Afterwards, Mina said she'd take Silvio's portion, adding that it was especially cold and crisp. He then suggested a more delicious way to eat crushed ice to Eleonora and asked if she'd like to know how. Surprised, she agreed. In conclusion, Alfred explained that instead of eating ice in small pieces, it is better to take large ones. This way the taste is much brighter and more pleasant. The guy suggested they just try it if she thought he was cheating, and calmly explained that it really did taste better. She snorted, calling it a waste of time, but agreed on the condition that if it didn't work, he'd compensate with an extra serving of crushed ice. After this, Alfred remarked that she could eat as much as she wanted. She was silent for a moment, then began to taste it cautiously, and her tense expression showed that the result was unexpected. Meanwhile, he calmly declared that this was retribution for that very blow. The other man immediately complained of a headache and began to loudly complain, clearly not expecting such an outcome. The boy then said that everything would become clear after that and, smiling, rested his cheek on his palms. The man with the bandage greeted him warmly, noting that he had come today as usual. Afterwards, the guy approached the chef and asked if he could borrow his kitchen. The chef suspiciously asked if he was just there for a bite to eat, but was told he wanted to try cooking something new. The adult then questioned whether he even knew how to cook. The young man confidently declared that he could handle it, having lived alone in Japan for some time, which genuinely surprised the man. After this, the chef declared that he couldn't allow the boy to get hurt and asked him to stay close. The boy calmly agreed, and noticing his serious attitude, the chef decided to help and asked what exactly they were planning to cook. Then Mina said she wanted to make spaghetti and asked if he knew the recipe. He listed the necessary ingredients: eggs, wheat, flour, salt, and oil. At that moment she noticed that watching the ice gather on the plate somehow reminded her of Japanese rice. Afterwards, she added that since they were using wheat, the dish could become a staple, and if it worked out, it would significantly expand their culinary possibilities. The chef perked up, calling the idea interesting, and suggested they gather the ingredients and get started right away. The boy then announced he was out of paper towels and explained he was going to pound something in a mortar. The man then explained how to properly pick berries, after which the boy thoroughly washed them under the tap while being watched closely. After some time, the man said with satisfaction that they had succeeded, and he didn't hide his surprise. The woman remarked that at first glance, she wanted to make the dish more attractive, but right now the main problem was the taste. In response, he suggested they finally try it, and she agreed. Afterwards, the guy remarked that it turned out quite delicious, especially the tomato sauce Bartolo prepared, which went perfectly with the pasta. He then added that now everything depends on Bartolo's assessment. Then the man on the right enthusiastically declared it incredibly delicious and asked what it was. The boy next to him noticed Alfred's expression was terrifying, but he abruptly corrected him and demanded 3 days, not 4, to create spaghetti that would surpass the current one. After that, Chef announced he'd be dropping by the kitchen more often. The boy asked not to call him Alfred, but simply Sam, as young man sounded odd. Chef agreed, and within 3 days, spaghetti had truly taken off in the Slow-led household. Meanwhile, a girl's battle cry rang out in the courtyard, brandishing a sword. Nearby, a boy nervously shouted out sounds, clutching his weapon and clearly trying to keep up. After this, Eleanor declared that she was giving it her all, and Alfred thought that Silvio, on the contrary, was behaving completely differently and not so zealously. Then Mina said that fencing was an important skill for self-defense. He remarked to himself that he didn't seem to enjoy this kind of training at all. After this, the boy honestly admitted that he actually preferred reading books and studying, and immediately noted that this was a completely worthy activity. Then Alfred asked what the other boy was doing. He explained anxiously that he was afraid that when he turned 6, he too would be forced to train with a sword. In the end, Eleanor asked if he'd still like to try his luck. He explained that he'd only come to see, because a carefree and peaceful life seemed like the best option of all. Mina laughed and said Alfred enjoyed a carefree time, then asked with a grin as she sounded old. He stood nearby and listened silently, not rushing to intervene. The boy then admitted that from a very early age magic had interested him far more than fencing, and now he was thinking about it more and more often. The girl responded by sharing that sometimes, after reading books, she would go out and practice magic and that she truly loved it. At that moment, Al's sister called out loudly, announcing that she'd finished sword training and inviting him out to play. Mina, with a slight smile, noted that his sister was indeed very energetic. Before leaving, Eleanor reminded them to wipe off the sweat and drink some water to restore their strength. She then added that they would be playing by the river, so there wouldn't be any problems, since there was water there. Mina briefly agreed, and Mama Elena sternly ordered everyone to go inside and wash up first. After that, she asked what exactly they were planning to do. She silently considered coming up with something simple, noting that the stones wouldn't bounce very far anyway, given that her hand strength was that of a 3-year-old. The girl on the right waved her hand, urging him to run, and he immediately took off. As he ran, he decided to enhance his hand with magic this time to test the effect. The boy then reported that the stone had bounced quite far, and he began counting the hits, first 7, then 8. The girl reacted with delight to the result. She excitedly declared that it looked really cool and fun, and immediately demanded to know what exactly he had done, insisting that he teach her everything without exception. He asked, surprised, if she was talking about throwing stones. After that, he patiently explained that she first needed to find a small stone, then grasp it with one hand and hold it correctly, demonstrating the proper grip. The girl watched attentively and agreed to give it a try. She threw the stone into the water with a scream, causing a splash. A nearby woman noticed that the stone wasn't bouncing at all, but the boy looked like he was genuinely enjoying the experience. He then explained that flat, thin stones were best and showed an example. Eleanor nodded, saying she now understood, and announced that she was beginning. She tossed the coin with all her might, then jumped up and down joyfully, exclaiming that she'd succeeded. He watched silently, noting to himself that she'd done even better than he had, which left an impression. The boy asked if there were fish in the river. The girl remarked that it must be great to have reflexes like her older sister. Alfred said that the river near the village of Kolyade was truly beautiful, and its water was amazingly clear. At that moment, the girl suddenly asked him what he was doing right now. He asked if she was tired of throwing stones but quickly corrected himself. She hesitated a bit and suggested fishing, but silently decided it would be better to suggest it herself before anyone mentioned swimming. The girl declared that Eleanor's ability to track people was unmatched. He responded by noting that, thanks to his spatial magic training, he could teleport very far to escape her, but even so, she somehow found him almost immediately. Eleanor confidently stated that her intuition told her Alfred was somewhere in that direction. Hearing this, the man next to her couldn't help but wonder if she was even human. The girl was skeptical about fishing, calling it boring. He noticed that she simply didn't understand all its charms and advantages, and immediately reminded himself that he too was a child now. Eleanor added that after the end they would be able to eat any fish they caught, and then asked in surprise if she had heard correctly, if someone had actually said the word fish. In the end, Mina announced she was going to get fishing rods, and she was surprised at how quickly she decided. The guy, however, quietly noted that she, as always, was thinking of herself first. The boy announced he was going to quickly pop into the pantry to grab some salt. Once inside, he suddenly heard a suspicious noise and turned curiously toward the source. A moment later, he clutched the bottle in his hands with satisfaction and quietly remarked that he had finally found what he needed. Then he asked Bartolo what he was doing, and he visibly flinched in surprise, clearly not expecting company. After this, the boy quickly added that it was just him. The man immediately asked him not to sneak up on him like that again, declaring that scaring was actually his prerogative. He then pointed to the bottle and asked what exactly was in it, to which he received an honest answer. It was sugar, obtained through an old acquaintance. The man then gravely explained that sugar wasn't just a rare commodity, but a vital ingredient for his culinary experiments, and apologized to Nord. He then abruptly covered Alfred's mouth with his hand, whispering that no one should know about this, while Nord began indignantly calling for his parents. At that moment, Sarah appeared and asked what they were doing. The man quickly declared that nothing out of the ordinary was going on, and the boy added that Sarah was the one who should have discovered it. Then Eleanor coolly remarked that of all the maids, she was the most picky about such things and came to check the ingredients. Sarah was surprised and replied that she could handle it herself, but the chef doubted it, reminding her that she kept a huge amount of wheat and other supplies and was unlikely to be able to keep track of everything properly. After this, the boy decided to intervene and announced that he had actually come for the fishing rods, asking gently if anyone knew where they were. The man immediately informed Sarah that Eleanor had come for them earlier, and that Mina was now helping carry them to the river. The boy mentally admired the cleverness of the situation and thought that deceiving Mina would have been much easier. At that moment, the girl approached, noticing his expression, and he looked up at her with genuine curiosity. She calmly explained the meaning of the word teleportation as someone's hand reached forward. Then, hearing another noise, she decided to go check out what was going on. Bartolo whispered that now was their chance and ordered them to hide everything immediately. The man immediately agreed and began to fuss, then reminded them that the debt would have to be repaid later, receiving a curt agreement. Meanwhile, by the river, the girl joyfully announced she'd caught a fish, while the boy sat quietly and silently nearby. Later, it became clear that after he collected the salt, he'd returned to the river, and she'd emerged victorious in their little competition, despite his protests about the unfairness. He then remarked that the wind was particularly pleasant today, and the weather surprisingly fine. He added that even in summer, it felt fresh here, and recalled that the sweltering heat in Japan was, in fact, something abnormal. The boss suddenly asked the man where he got such a strange smile. He responded with surprise and admitted that village life really did seem like the best option for him. To his right, Bartolo noticed someone's presence and casually remarked that they were just his own people. He then confirmed the man was alive and nodded with satisfaction. Meanwhile, it became clear that the observer had witnessed something he shouldn't have. Bartolo possessed, albeit a small amount, of extremely valuable sugar. After they managed to elude the watchful and perceptive demonic maid, the girl cheerfully admitted that they decided to properly pamper themselves and secretly threw a pancake party, adding that she simply adores sweets. Sarah sternly stated that the last time she checked the supplies there shouldn't have been any sugar there, and demanded an explanation. The girl replied that they'd been discovered almost immediately, and the boy remarked that it had been rude not to invite them, explaining that he'd simply smelled a sweet odor coming from the mansion. It soon became known that Bartolo had been subjected to harsh treatment by the women, and the girl with the ponytail admitted that she too had been reprimanded. Afterwards, the boy cautiously asked Bartolo if he had any sugar left, but he lashed out and called him an idiot. At that very moment, Eleanor loudly shouted the key word, causing everyone to become wary. Mina claimed she'd definitely heard someone mention sugar, and the Slolit family maid agreed. Mina then added that she could have sworn she'd heard the word just recently. At the end, Eleanor looked around the garden and said she didn't see anyone, and Mina confirmed that she didn't notice anyone either. The chief admitted he was startled, and Mina noted with surprise that she'd never seen herself so perceptive. Finally, the chief sternly warned that such words shouldn't be spoken so casually. The guy asked if there were any goods left. The answer was that the stock was small, but there were still some items, which pleased him, as he admitted he wanted to try making a lot of different things. Afterwards, the man explained that he'd perfected the cream cheese he'd been asked for earlier. He added that he was eagerly awaiting the new dish, as he'd grown rather tired of spaghetti after a long period of eating it, and admitted that he understood the desire for variety. Then the chief remarked that it was worth hanging in there anyway and just waiting to see what would happen. Mina added that at least now he was full of energy, and recalled the first time she saw him and was truly stunned. Meanwhile, Eleanor asked what kinds of magic he could use. She clarified that she'd heard of water and earth magic, and he confirmed this, adding that, including spatial magic, he possessed approximately 8 different attributes. After that, she asked to demonstrate any spell. Alfred calmly agreed, and at that very moment, a barely noticeable magical energy began to gather around his palm. A moment later, he announced he was finished, standing next to the chair. The woman next to him looked visibly surprised by such a quick result. Then Eleanor, perplexed, asked where the spell itself was. He explained that he had recited it mentally, remembering that he had been able to use magic without words since childhood. Sarah listened attentively and said she understood. After that, she nodded and asked if there was anything else she could do with magic. The answer was a confident yes, and soon a soft light could be seen emanating from his hand. He then handed the woman a cup and explained that he'd been using magic a lot lately for such trivial matters. She thanked him and remarked that it was now clear he possessed several attributes including ice magic. Afterwards, Mina said she needed to review his magical training program, so they would stop for today. Alfred agreed without objection. She noted that he was a true magical prodigy, and likely had nothing left to teach him, and Sarah added that he was truly impressive. Eleanor then asked if he knew any combat spells. He replied that he was content with magic useful in everyday life, and she remarked that this was very much his style. Afterwards, Alfred asked if she'd like to enroll in a magic school. The girl asked in surprise, and the narrative immediately clarified that the offer was politely declined because he hadn't yet had time to enjoy his own childhood. The man then asked if everything was ready, and the woman confidently replied that there was nothing to worry about. After that, he informed Alfred that they were leaving, wished him a safe journey, and his father reminded him of the purpose of the walk. Alfred confirmed that they would be patrolling the village's outskirts. Mama Elena added that, according to village custom, the villagers arranged a tour for the feudal lord's son, who had recently turned 4, and wondered if he didn't already know about it. Mina replied that her mother had already explained everything to her in advance. Afterwards, Alfred asked if the boy had been to the village before. He replied that it was his first visit, although he had already played in the meadows. The man then explained that the village was very close to the estate, about a 10-minute drive. Nearby was a meadow where he often played, and a forest where they used to throw stones by the river. He added that after today's visit, he would be able to teleport there at any time, but to do so, he would need to clearly visualize the place in his mind. The narrative lingered on the surrounding landscape, noting the succession of fields and mountains, and then smoothly returned to the sensations of the moment. The boy gazed admiringly at the lush greenery, comparing it to a soft carpet, and called the village road truly magnificent. The girl explained that it was the aroma of plants and the earthy scent of the soil that made her love the countryside so much. The man listened with a slightly questioning expression. After this, the boy began talking about rice, mentioning that something similar seemed to exist on the eastern continent. He recalled having recently read a book that mentioned this legendary grain. At the end of the scene, a boy, sitting on a bookshelf, was indignant at Dumfries' abandonment of his adventures, calling it unforgivable. Nearby, Alfred noticed that the village was almost visible from here, and Dumfries reacted with genuine surprise. The guy looked around with genuine admiration and said that in front of him was the very village of Koliot, which he had imagined in his head so many times, but only now saw for real. He then asked his father what crops were grown here. His father calmly listed wheat, barley, rye, legumes, and various vegetables, adding that the village kept chickens, sheep, and even the occasional cow, which genuinely impressed the boy. After this, one of the adults noticed the feudal lord and greeted him politely, and the boy followed suit. At that moment, Alfred noticed the unfamiliar figure and quietly asked who it was. Meanwhile, Eleanor proudly announced that the spaghetti recipe she'd recently learned had turned out to be a great success and everyone had enjoyed it. He replied that he was glad to hear it, noting to himself that the villagers looked surprisingly lively and cheerful, before asking if it was them. Eleanor's mother immediately added that it was her son who had invented the method for making spaghetti. Hearing this, the man next to him couldn't hide his surprise, while the boy himself remained silent. Alfred was then asked his age, and he calmly replied that he was 4. Afterward, one of the men remarked that he was unusually reserved for his age, especially compared to their own brat, and another echoed this, saying that the child seemed very sensible. Eleanor chuckled and said she found it funny too, explaining that he was just a little odd. The chief immediately reinforced this, calling him a very odd child. Then the man announced they were going to tour the village and invited her to stop by anytime, to which the girl agreed without hesitation. Afterwards, one of the adults advised Alfred to grow up big and strong, like his father, addressing him with respect. In response, the boy sternly advised him to try not to be distracted by his wife during training, which caused some confusion. The man laughed and declared that there was no point in being sad now, because everything was going perfectly, as if he'd hit the target. The boy immediately asked how he'd figured that out. Then someone remarked that it was surprising to hear such a calm and mature response from a child, and asked incredulously if Alfred was really only 4 years old. After that, the guy began explaining that he already understood how the local market worked, and that all trade here was based on barter. Meanwhile, nearby, a woman in a headscarf and a man were chatting near crates of fruit, while another girl in a collared shirt was discussing something at the vegetable counter. He suddenly noticed the brightly colored mushrooms and warned of their danger, after which he looked at them closely, clearly doubting their safety. Then one of the men explained that trade in the square is conducted through barter, and therefore there is always some room for agreement. The woman echoed this sentiment, adding that without such flexibility, life would be impossible for those forced to barter. Afterwards, the man noted that the standard of living in the village was quite high and stable, and that was precisely why the exchange system worked so well. The woman nodded, indicating her agreement. The boy turned to his father again and asked if this wasn't surprising. He explained that Kaliat was originally a prosperous village, and since it was small and located in the outback, taxes to the royal capital were quite low, so there was nothing unusual about it. Then one of the men said that this young man must be Alfred Sama, to which he calmly confirmed. The man then greeted Nord Sama, and Nord nodded respectfully to the village chief. The man remarked that he was pleased to see how healthy he had grown and asked how the village was treating him. The response was that everything was going well and the residents were full of life, and the man admitted that this was gratifying to hear. Nord asked about the situation in the village and noticed that people's faces showed that this year had been better than the previous one. The woman confirmed this, explaining that thanks to stable weather and a bountiful harvest last fall, they had survived the winter without any deaths from starvation. Afterwards, Nord remarked that winters in this world generally present quite a few problems, and suggested coming to his house for a quiet chat, if the other man was up for it. The man agreed without hesitation. Finally, Mina said she wanted to explore the village a little more, if no one objected. The chief asked about Alfred, and she immediately warned him not to stray too far. Alfred agreed, and Mina began to explain something enthusiastically, leading him further down the road. The boy realized his pocket money was gone and declared shopping done. He stood among the cooking ingredients, seasonings, planks, logs, and other materials, assessing his haul with practical calm. Mina examined everything and declared it quite sufficient. Then she confidently declared there were no problems and suddenly shouted the word, warehouse, as if putting an end to this step. Afterwards, the boy explained that, using spatial magic, Alfred could freely remove and retrieve objects from his personal subspace. Time didn't exist there, so food didn't spoil, and he immediately thought it would be a good idea to record everything that went there. He then remarked that such magic was every merchant's dream, adding that its convenience was difficult to overestimate even in everyday life. A little later he called out to Alfred, asking if he'd finished his conversation with the village chief. Upon hearing the confirmation, Alfred asked if he'd noticed anything interesting, and in response he mentioned a stall selling rainbow mushrooms that looked downright poisonous. Afterwards, the woman suggested they try the local cuisine since there was still plenty of time. The man greeted them warmly, and someone nearby exclaimed in surprise, addressing the feudal lord with respect. The woman greeted Saria warmly and asked how she was doing. She then added that, thanks to the spaghetti recipe she'd passed on, she'd had so many customers that they were hard to count. Eleanor noted that this was the second such incident today, and Alfred calmly replied that it was all thanks to this little guy, nodding in his direction. The man immediately realized it was Alfred Sama, and Alfred then asked if he had any new recipes worth trying. He replied that he had some ideas but was missing some tools and ingredients. Mama Elena intervened and suggested that if it was about tools, they could turn to Logan, the village blacksmith. She added that he had a stubborn character, but his hands were steady and his craftsmanship was proven. The girl was surprised by this turn of events, but the woman confidently declared that she would take charge and put in a good word. Thus, the visit to the village unexpectedly ended with a path to obtaining new kitchen utensils. Later, the boy decided it was time to use the materials and tools he'd gathered in the village. He carefully sawed the boards into squares and cut a neat 8x8 grid into the surface. He then explained that the wooden blanks needed to be turned into small round pieces. He then added that one side of each piece needed to be painted black. Afterwards, the young man thoughtfully remarked that the game takes a minute to learn, but a lifetime to master. He marveled at its depth and complexity, despite its apparent simplicity, and then announced the end of the turn and flipped the pieces over on the board. Eleanor asked what it was and flinched when he suddenly appeared right in front of her. He calmly explained it was a game called Reversey and asked if she wanted to try it. She replied that he startled her and asked when he'd even entered the room. The man then began explaining the rules, explaining that the goal of the game is to change the color of your opponent's pieces. If, for example, a white piece is caught between two black pieces, it is captured and becomes black. He then added that the winner is the one with the most pieces of their color at the end, and received confirmation that he had been understood. The girl said it sounded simple and suggested they play right away. He agreed without hesitation, waiting to see how things would unfold. She immediately declared that she was not going to hold back, and he in turn suggested that she make the first move, while remaining calm. After a few moves, the man pointed out that since he had pinched the piece, it turned white, and then asked in bewilderment what was going on the board. At the end, the girl loudly protested, asking why she'd lost and how it had even happened. He calmly informed her that with the score 56-8, victory seemed certain, and then said nothing more, leaving her alone with the result. The girl in the upper right corner was silent, and the guy called out to her, calling her sister. Meanwhile, another figure in the upper left corner inquired what was going on. Mina in the lower right corner enthusiastically remarked that it was incredibly fun and immediately suggested they play again, to which the guy in the lower left agreed without hesitation. Then it became clear that the losing side wasn't going to give in. They kept asking for another chance, irritated by their losses, confused about why they were losing again, yet stubbornly insisted on continuing. After that, the girl asked to play again, declaring that she had plenty of strength. The guy wearily noted that he'd lost count of how many times he'd heard that phrase and added that it was almost dinner time. Hearing this, she reluctantly asked if perhaps they should stop then. At that moment, Mama Elena entered and informed Eleonora and Alfredo that it was time for dinner, asking what they were doing. The girl explained that they were engrossed in a board game. Eleanor immediately asked what the game was, and Mina took it upon herself to explaining that Alfred had taught her a game where you use colored pieces to surround and turn over your opponent's pieces. The guy then added that the winner is the one with the most pieces of their color at the end of the game. He also wondered if it was possible to place the pieces anywhere, and suddenly noticed that the board pattern seemed familiar. After that, Eleanor said she figured it out and suggested he try it himself. Mina supported the idea, and the boy happily sat down, clearly pleased with how things were going. Alfred began explaining the move, demonstrating that if a stone was placed a certain way, the adjacent pieces would flip over, and confirmed that it was now his turn. At that moment, they reminded her that they were still in her room, and the chief inquired where she and Elena's mother were, adding that someone should have come for them by now. The guy remarked that they weren't likely to be going anywhere anytime soon. The girl cautiously asked if something had happened, and the woman clarified that the word happened wasn't quite right for what was happening. Silvio then asked if he could see what the ladies were doing. Alfred confirmed that he could, but also remarked that he didn't think it was the smartest idea. After that, the guy screamed, and the girl quickly walked away. He concluded that dinner would likely be noticeably delayed tonight. A few dozen minutes passed, and Mina returned, asking what everyone was doing. Her voice already betrayed surprise at what was happening. She then admitted that even Elena couldn't believe it. She apologized and explained that the game had become so addictive that it had been impossible to stop. After this, Mina decisively announced that she was temporarily banning everyone from playing the game and confiscating the board. The girl loudly protested, but Mina immediately asked her to keep the noise down. The boy thoughtfully remarked that too much entertainment easily leads to addiction, and admitted that this was indeed frightening. Alfred made a mental note to remember this conclusion. He then decided that for everyone's peace of mind, it would be better to make another set of reversi. He also noted to himself that everyone was so engrossed that even if his father later lifted the ban, he'd likely never see his board again because of Nissan and the others. At that moment, the chief asked the boy what he was doing in such a place. He calmly replied that he was just doing his craft. He then added that he'd heard rumors about that very interesting game and demanded that she make him one. The guy was genuinely surprised and said he didn't understand why he should be doing this, when suddenly there was a strange sound. The chef explained that he knew someone who was literally crazy about such things, adding that he had a certain pride that needed a little tampering, so there was nothing wrong with that. The man questioned whether they should be friends, and the chef agreed, promising to make one. Finally, Alfred realized he'd probably have to go back to the village for more supplies. He exhaled heavily, muttered under his breath, and suddenly realized there was nothing left, wondering if he'd used up the last of his supplies, before his strength finally gave out. The boy mentioned he needed to stop by the blacksmith's to order some kitchen tools. The woman next to him suddenly stopped and said she'd only just remembered something important, as if the thought had popped up at the last minute. After this, the man declared that there was no time to waste and that he needed to hurry. He added that with the new kitchen utensils he would be able to further expand his culinary arsenal, and then mentally summed up, for the sake of a calm and comfortable life, his small difficulties would continue. Meanwhile, the girl suggested going down to the lake, noting that the weather was particularly nice today. She conveyed the thought with a wistful sound, clearly imagining how pleasant it would be to spend time there. The narrator went on to note that it was only recently that they encountered the concept of gambling addiction for the first time in this world. It was after this that they found themselves back in the village of Kolyat, this time with the specific goal of meeting a local blacksmith named Logan. Along the way, they could hear women talking about how they'd had to ask for more spaghetti. Another woman confirmed that she'd had the same experience. A man nearby remarked that, in all worlds, housewives' conversations invariably revolved around food or their husbands. Alfred, for his part, thought he hadn't expected the spaghetti to be such a success, and wondered if he should share his pancake recipe as well. The story then shifted to the forest outside the village. The woman said she'd rather not remember the sugar incident anymore, and the little boy looked at her questioningly, not fully understanding what had happened. The boy said he'd followed Surya-san's instructions and should see the house any minute. Almost immediately he spotted the building and announced with relief that it was definitely the one. Afterwards, he apologized and cautiously asked if Logan could be found here. At that moment, something fell to the floor with a dull thud. The boss abruptly declared that this was no place for children and ordered them to go home without further explanation. The boy on the right yawned and said it was a first for him, explaining that the workshop was truly no place for children to play. Meanwhile, the one on the left thought Logan might easily have mistaken him for an idle child, but he himself insisted he was far from simple. Then the guy called out loudly to Logan and stated directly that he wanted to order one thing from him. The man rudely told her not to bother him and said he had no time for childish games. The boy silently noted that this was exactly what he had expected. Then he calmly said he wasn't going to back down and understood the situation. He added that Surya-san had assured him that Logan would definitely help, but it seemed he'd have to go back and say that expectations hadn't been met. At that moment, the man with the blindfold suggested they wait. The woman quietly explained that if she said her name, he would probably give in, and the man silently noted that it's always good for children to have an ace up their sleeve. The boss, having cooled down a bit, asked what exactly was required of him, expressing doubts about whether he should even trust the other man. The guy replied that he was at least willing to listen to what he had to say. He then explained that he could simply use Syria's name to trick her into helping him. He added that he knew how it would end for any villager who dared to do such a thing, and emphasized that Syria's people must be strong and reliable. Afterwards, the boy asked Syria what she had done to the man. She replied that just a second ago he had been extremely harsh. The man himself, standing with his back to them, muttered that they had no chance of winning. The guy then asked Logan what exactly he specialized in. Logan paused and replied that he needed a little time to formulate an answer. The man explained that he works with frying pans, farm tools, cutlery, and even swords. But if he had to choose, making utensils was his strong point. In conclusion, the young man remarked that without the ability to make such things, it was impossible to be a village blacksmith. Logan agreed and heard the addition that he was capable of creating a truly wide range of items, which sounded like a testament to his skill. The guy asked Logan to make him a knife and a frying pan. The chef nodded, admitting the knife was all clear, but he questioned why he needed a new frying pan and why the old round one wouldn't do. The boy then began explaining that he needed a square frying pan with a slightly raised handle, stumbling over the details of the shape. He then asked if he had anything to draw with, then touched the hand and quietly uttered the word, teleport. He then added that this would be his first experience with a four-sided frying pan and demonstrated exactly what it should look like. The chef simply smiled in response, clearly interested in the idea. A week later, the man asked how things were going. The reply was that everything had worked out perfectly and that it had been surprisingly easy to use, followed by sincere words of gratitude. Then the chef asked how exactly they intended to use such a strange frying pan. The man replied that he could demonstrate right now if they would lend him the kitchen and ingredients, and asked if they had any eggs. The girl noted that the chef also had sugar, and he added that he would share sugar and salt if needed. Afterwards, he warned them that the process would take some time and suggested they sit by the stove to warm up. Alfred briefly indicated that he understood and had no objections. Looking around, the guy noticed a lot of damage and decided to help by fixing the place. He said he'd do the repairs while he waited. The man noted with surprise that at such a young age he was already capable of using magic. In response, he explained that he was handling it without any problems at this level and was just about to patch up the holes in the walls. Hearing this, the other man acknowledged that such assistance would be invaluable. The boy added that magic is useful not only in battle but also in everyday life, so he tries to practice every day as it's incredibly convenient. The woman remarked that he acted too mature for his age, and he replied that he heard it all the time. The chef noted with interest that the boy was quite skilled and asked if he planned to become a chef in the future. He replied that he had no such ambition, but he really enjoyed cooking. After a while, the woman announced that everything was ready. The man explained that this was precisely the result he'd ordered the square pan for. The chef tried the dish and said it was delicious, and the guy added with satisfaction that it turned out great. The man then explained that he usually eats fried or scrambled eggs, but layering them like he does now creates a particularly satisfying texture. He noted that if this cooking method becomes popular, many will order dishes cooked in a square pan, and the woman agreed. He confidently confirmed that there was no doubt about it, adding that he had easily obtained the necessary kitchen utensils. The boy decided it was time to start preparing and asked if the dish could be served at Syria's establishment. Hearing the agreement, he mentally encouraged himself, and the story hinted that this might have been the beginning of another passion. After this, the boy announced that he had completed training for today to increase his magical power reserves. Alfred added that his mastery of earthly magic was also gradually improving and recalled the first time he tried to build a house. The result then looked more like a prison cell than a home. The man remarked that since this was a rural area, there was plenty of vacant land around. He added that next time he'd like to find a good spot and build himself some kind of vacation home. The guy admitted that he seemed to have completely used up his magic, felt very tired, and noted that he had been extremely busy lately. The man thoughtfully compared what was happening to the story of Reversi and Tamagoyaki, to which the woman responded with genuine surprise. In conclusion, Mina reported that after the Reversi tournament was announced, people began flocking almost immediately, and the cafeteria was used as the venue. Alfred was amazed to realize that this was a real Reversi tournament. The woman checked to see if they had enough boards, adding that Herman had gone to great lengths to bring a whole bunch. She then turned to him for confirmation. Alfred greeted her politely, reacting with mild surprise at the mention of his name. Then the dark-haired man noticed that everyone there was frankly starved for entertainment and asked if his companion had finished his set. The fair-haired man replied that he'd barely made it in time for the tournament and praised him for his work, while the girl between them impatiently said she couldn't wait for the game to start and asked him to hurry with her set. Afterwards, the guy asked if he needed help today. The woman informed him that there was a special prize for the winner of the Reversi tournament, a match with the game's creator himself. He was genuinely surprised and asked if that meant the winner would be announced right then. The girl then introduced herself, saying her name was Carla, and the man next to her proudly called her his dear daughter, repeating her name. Elena's mother announced to the young master that it was time to begin the special match and wished Carla good luck, to which she reacted with surprise. Several men offered kind words of encouragement to both participants, but the young man simply sighed heavily and agreed. Meanwhile, Mina stated that she was already 12 years old and was much older than Alfred, but this did not mean that she would hide anything or give in. Carla said she felt the same way. In response, he explained that he was the one who brought Reversi to these parts, and that he was the son of a local feudal lord. After that, he pulled himself together, assumed a serious demeanor, promised to show the locals a worthy match, and called for a fair match. After a while, the girl couldn't hide her shock and declared it impossible, wondering how it had happened. A boy nearby explained that it looked like Alfred had won, and the other children burst into murmurs of delight and surprise. Carla admitted he was indeed strong but quickly added that he would definitely win next time. He calmly replied that that was good and assured her he was ready to play her at any time. The guy then said the match had been great and suggested they go get something to eat. The girl readily agreed, and Alfred remarked to himself that they looked almost like mother and daughter, while the horn guy added that such behavior was to be expected from Syria's daughter. The woman on the right asked Syria to make her tamagoyaki, the man next to her agreed, and Syria admitted she wanted some too. The woman in the center asked Carla for help, who agreed, and the man on the left gave a short sound of approval. Mina noted that tamagoyaki had also become popular. Mama Elena added that, thanks to the spaghetti and tamagoyaki recipes, every day was completely booked, and Mina said she was glad to hear that. Afterward, the woman admitted that she was feeling extremely tired due to the influx of clients and would feel better if Alfred helped out occasionally. He replied that in that case, he'd simply teach Bartolo the recipe and send him here, and she called that a huge help. Later, the young man, lying down, admitted that although he was extremely busy, he tolerated it all for the sake of a comfortable and measured life. After a short pause, he added, "Fine, so be it." Waking up, he stretched and said he'd slept well, then decided to head to the kitchen. A girl approached him in the hallway saying she wanted to talk to Bartolo, and he, noticing her, couldn't help but let out a short, Listening closely, he decided the noise was coming from the maid's lounge, where Sarah and someone else seemed to be. Alfred wondered if they were discussing him, and inside the room, head maid Mel was indeed saying that his eyes made it seem as if he had no ambition at all. The boy remarked that it was hard to believe he was only 4 years old and expressed interest in what else he might come up with in the near future. She then added that, in addition to spaghetti and tamagoyaki, he also possessed magic, and that Reversi was entirely his idea. Mina said she'd heard that adding a little sugar changes the taste of tamagoyaki. Sarah immediately noticed that Mina had her usual sweet tooth and asked how she knew that. The fair-haired girl explained that she had accidentally overheard Bartolo and Alfredo's conversation in the kitchen. The dark-haired girl replied that she understood, affectionately calling her a sweet tooth, and Alfred wondered if she had really just heard that. At that moment, the man asked if Bartolo was there and greeted him. Bartolo replied that he was going to experiment with mixing different ingredients, and the man asked if it had anything to do with eggs again. The guy asked if anyone had any good ideas, and then suggested adding green onions to the tomatoes. The girl immediately said it sounded good and suggested they definitely try it. Then the chief gloomily announced that he'd overheard Mina's conversation with the other maids and realized that the information about adding something unmentionable to the tamagoyaki had already surfaced. He then sharply asked if it was true. Without wasting any time, he declared that the sugar needed to be immediately divided and hidden, ordering them to act quickly. She immediately agreed and specifically warned Bartolo to be extremely careful. The guy chuckled and remarked that they were acting like the kings of some underground empire, sneaking away their goods. The boss muttered that he should be more careful too, and the response was that everything should be fine since the situation was under control. At that moment, the girl called out to Bartolo and asked him point blank if it was true that adding a little sugar would make the tamagoyaki even more delicious. The boss shrugged and said he could try it if he wanted. The guy admitted he wasn't sure he dared. Sarah explained it was almost like medicine and asked him not to be afraid, then looked ahead with an unusually serious expression. Eleanor noticed the man was holding something. He quickly replied that it wasn't sugar, but salt, and immediately apologized for the misunderstanding. Mina confidently declared it was indeed sugar, adding that her intuition told her there was more somewhere. She insisted on continuing the search, while the chief repeated several times that there was nothing else there. Mina began to object, but he stubbornly stood his ground. The boy calmly reminded her that he had a subspace storage facility and that spatial magic was incredibly convenient. The man responded by admitting he was hiding something elsewhere, and then pleadingly asked her to stop this conversation. Meanwhile, Alfred was busy with his studies and recalled that the very moment he turned 6, he immediately began studying. Muffled voices and a quiet hum could be heard against the backdrop of the large building. At the top of the stage, he stood at a blackboard labeled Arithmetic. To the left, his thoughts drifted to a girl at a table with cutlery and the word etiquette. In the center, he, eyes closed and hair loose, confessed that all those moans were coming from him. Eleanor said she didn't understand this at all and asked how things had gotten this far. The man replied philosophically that mathematics was precisely that type of demon. The long-haired woman explained that the girl was excellent at fencing and asked what was wrong. The ponytailed girl replied that she wanted to be the best in the area and would never give in to anyone. Eleanor added that her father was, of course, an exception. Mina remained silent, and the boy on her right watched their conversation in silence. The boy noticed that, compared to Eleonora, Silvio looked much calmer and more balanced. The boy then mentioned that he'd recently heard rumors about his popularity among the village women. The girl immediately denied it, insisting such a thing was impossible, but he continued speaking as if he didn't pay any attention to her words. He admitted he was terribly jealous, after which he uttered the name Alfred. It flashed through his mind that he was only pretending not to understand. Eleanor asked what had happened to Alfred, and if there was a task he didn't understand. He calmly stated that he understood everything and was capable of solving such problems without difficulty. The boy explained that the work itself was tiring him out and he wanted to go play, but if he solved everything too quickly, they'd just give him more homework. The woman offered to end the lesson for the day if he could handle these examples, and he enthusiastically agreed. The man remarked that today's assignments were quite challenging. The woman confirmed this, admitting that she herself understood almost nothing, and the long-haired woman added that Eleanor's assignments were merely a review of last week's material. Eleanor announced she'd completed the task, which genuinely surprised the boy. He immediately asked if she'd really done it all. Mina indignantly declared that impossible, but the boy calmly confirmed that the work was indeed complete, then called out to Alfred. Sarah immediately intervened and reminded him that the answers hadn't been checked yet, meaning the lesson wasn't over. The boy apologized, admitting he hadn't noticed her presence, and then stared with genuine interest at the sheet of addition problems. After a brief check, Eleanor confidently declared everything correct and they could go. The boy happily agreed, while Mina flushed with displeasure, calling it unfair. Mama Elena suggested they start over from the very beginning. When they stepped outside, the boy remarked on how pleasant the fresh air felt and immediately asked Alfred if he'd finished his studies for the day. She replied that she'd call Dad now. Mina explained that her mother had given her permission to go out because she'd finished work earlier than everyone else and was now going to play. She added that her father had also just finished work and then suggested they go outside and practice fencing, which visibly surprised the boy. Someone asked if sword training was cancelled during the day, and the answer was that any time was suitable for weapons practice. The boy admitted that it was important for him to spend at least a little time with his father, and since he was doing well with magic, he should at least try his hand at fencing. The man demonstrated how to hold a firm grip, loosen it when lowering the blade, and when stopping, and the boy confirmed that he understood. Then came the explanation that simply waving your arms wasn't enough, and that you needed to tuck your elbows in tighter. After that, the command was given to perform 100 practice swings, and everyone unanimously agreed. After a while, the boy announced he was finished. The man noted that his technique had noticeably improved, and he thanked her, breathing heavily, adding that he would still prefer studying to such activities. Eleanor announced that lessons would resume in the afternoon and asked them to give it their all. Alfred was delighted to hear that practice would resume later. He quietly admitted that he didn't want to go to the day's fencing practice at all, and sighed heavily. It soon became clear that Eleanor and Silvio had decided to duel. Their faces were shown alternately, as if identifying their opponents before the fight. At the signal, the girl with the sword lunged forward, and Silvio attacked with a cry. Alfred reacted with pain and an unexpected cry, after which Silvio worriedly asked what had happened. The ponytailed girl deftly dodged the blow, causing her fair-haired opponent to recoil in amazement. She immediately joyfully declared victory, leaving him in complete shock. She turned to Alfred and asked if he wanted to fight too, declaring that she really wanted another fight. He replied that he was in pain, while the 3 other onlookers watched the scene in silence. 2 girls at the window remarked that everyone was clearly having fun, and a boy standing nearby added that the day had turned out to be peaceful again. The man explained that he himself had recently fought with his father and ended up almost the same way as Silvio Nissan, admitting that they were better suited to studying than fighting. The boy announced that today was the day he would finally start making the swing, but suddenly reacted sharply to something unexpected. The man lying nearby also looked shocked. The lying man sat up and asked who this old man was, clearly not understanding what was happening. The boy considered how to wake the man lying on the floor, noticing there were no signs of him waking up soon. Then he calmly declared that it was already lunchtime. At that moment, the chief suddenly jumped up and shouted that he'd heard the word lunch, demanding to know who had said it. The boy immediately noted that he had, after all, woken up. The man sharply asked who the guy was, adding that he was merely sleeping in the house he'd built himself. The man responded calmly, saying that it was actually his own remark, spoken without a hint of embarrassment. Then the man in the scarf reacted with obvious surprise, declaring that this was no ordinary place to relax. The boy next to him immediately objected, advising him not to look down on other people's bases. After this, the guest finally turned his attention to the furniture, asked again who the old man was, and introduced himself as Alfred, while the boy noted that he seemed overly interested in the furnishings. The man with the eye patch then said that he had not yet given his name and introduced himself as Rumba, greeting his interlocutor without unnecessary ceremony. Alfred thoughtfully repeated Rumba's name and clarified, "Not like a vacuum cleaner." The man responded calmly, claiming he had a good place, as if the question were entirely appropriate. Afterwards, the young man admitted he hadn't expected to find a swimming area there, and asked bluntly if the guest had washed his clothes, as the smell was quite pungent. The man calmly confirmed that, of course he had, and then offered him some ale, to which he remarked that he knew how to host guests quite well. The man with the eye patch noted that the ale was ice cold and expressed surprise at what was happening. The boy explained that he had cooled the drink using ice magic, and when asked about the magical tool, he confirmed that he had used his own abilities, despite his young age. Then the chief paused and remembered that the princess of this country also possessed ice magic. He immediately asked Rumba if he had arrived from the royal capital, and then suddenly cried out, noticing a sizable portion of food before him. The man explained that before he got to that spaghetti everyone was talking about, he preferred to be well fed and only then discuss business. The guy immediately asked where he'd heard that. The reply was that a merchant friend named Triella had told them about it. A woman nearby corrected him, clarifying that he was usually called Trisan, after which it became clear that they were talking about a merchant who regularly visited the village of Koliot. The boss, picking up the topic, declared that since they were talking about Trisan, it was worth mentioning the sugar they'd found. Mina immediately informed Sarah of the secret door, to which she couldn't help but gasp in surprise. The woman thanked Trisan, who dismissed the matter modestly, declaring it a mere trifle. He then quickly apologized, and the man standing nearby became visibly nervous, explaining that if he made enemies among the women of Koliot, he would no longer be able to show his face there. The guy casually added that after that, all his snacks were taken away for a whole week, and he would definitely scold the culprit the next time they met. The boss became wary and asked if something had happened, but received a calm reply that nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Then the boy asked Rumba why he'd come to Koliot village in the first place, and offered him more. Rumba was surprised that the question was addressed to him, as if he hadn't expected such attention. The man explained that he'd been pondering for a long time where to go next, and it was Triella who told him about this place, after which he decided to see it for himself. A woman nearby confirmed that this was indeed the case. The boy remarked that this was the first time an adventurer had come to the village since his birth. He added that the village was quite far from the royal capital, and he hadn't expected it to be so remote. The man remarked that the long journey was indeed tiring, but then began to discuss the movement of people. The guest then asked his interlocutor what his plans were for the future, and immediately admitted that he found the village calm and cozy, so he was thinking of staying here for a while. The guy asked if he was planning to stay at a hotel, adding that it had a kitchen and a bathroom, so the conditions were quite suitable. The boss replied that if he was able to take care of himself, there would be no problem. The boy, surprised, asked if the man lived here and if there weren't too many houses for a child. The explanation was that this was just a second house, with the main one located elsewhere. The man then inquired as to the exact location of the other house. Alfred explained that it was a mansion near the village, belonging to a feudal lord, and added that he was the second son of the Slavlet family, which elicited a reaction of recognition. In conclusion, the boy calmly explained that Nord Slavlet was the name of the feudal lord who ruled these lands, and without further ado, he added that this man was his father. The chief calmly stated that Nord was known as a dragon slayer. The boy immediately looked surprised and asked where such a strange nickname came from, clearly not expecting to hear something like that. The story then shifted to events many years earlier, when the dragon began to ravage the royal capital. It was Nord who played a key role in its pacification, proving himself particularly brilliant that day. The man with the eye patch explained that he had been in the same squad with Nord at the time, and that it was the only time they had fought side by side. The boy admitted he hadn't known about this and hesitated for a moment, searching for words. The guest then added that he still clearly remembered that noble and courageous image, and was sure the boy's father hadn't forgotten it either. The boy silently agreed, realizing that a man with such a character was impossible to erase from memory, and decided not to dwell on it. Alfred noted that he already knew about his father's past as a prominent adventurer, but his father never shared the details, probably because of the awkward nickname that had stuck with him. Afterwards, the man with the eye patch offered to take him to the mansion and asked if it was possible. The boy responded with a mixture of surprise and confusion, not immediately understanding where the conversation was heading. The woman asked to wait a little and said that she would now call Nord Sama, clearly considering this the most correct decision. The chief explained that this was his residence and added that he had no choice but to bring the boy, who clung to him as if he had no intention of letting go. The boy himself admitted that what was happening truly looked strange. Eleanor noticed they had a guest and inquired who it might be. The girl in the dress next to her couldn't hide her surprise, clearly not expecting such a visit. The guy quietly noted that this girl was the same sorceress who had once been crazy about Nord, and this explained her reaction. Hearing the name Roomba, the man was suddenly surprised, but the woman immediately asked him to stop, reminding him that all this had happened a long time ago and there was no point in bringing up old stories. He laughed and said she still remembered him, and she calmly replied that it was only natural, since it was impossible to forget someone like that. The boy noted with surprise that he'd never seen such an expression on his mother's face. Eleanor noticed that her mother looked no older than 30. The boss explained that this was probably her true self, the one she had before she became a model lady. The man in the scarf leaned toward the long-haired girl and quietly pointed out that Alfred was watching them. The little boy next to him smiled, and the girl reacted with noticeable embarrassment. Mama Elena thanked Alfred for his support of the guests and offered him some candy from the living room. He immediately assumed she was simply trying to maintain at least a modicum of parental authority over the children. The boy mentally lamented that his mother continued to treat him like a child, and noted that he could have just taken the candy, but she immediately asked what was bothering him. Then he pointed out that her embarrassed expression was very cute. The girl responded with a stunned exclamation, clearly not expecting such a comment. The man laughed loudly and admitted he simply wanted to see her confused face one more time. The boy looked quite pleased, while the woman silently watched the scene. The boy announced that he now had a candy with his name on it. The woman immediately asked him to stop, and Mina remarked that it looked like they had brought a guest after all. Sarah turned to Alfred, as if preparing him for a reaction. At that moment, the boy exclaimed with delight that they were facing a real dragon slayer, and Alfred reacted with genuine surprise. Sarah, perplexed, asked what a dragon even was while Alfred remained silent. He then sharply demanded that they stop ignoring him and explain the origin of the nickname, but all he heard in response was that they pretended not to hear him. At that moment, the boy silently noted that he had known all along that it was an awkward name. The next day, a man and a girl with a sword clashed. He attacked first, and she immediately parried his blow, displaying a refined reflex. Afterwards, Alfred informed him that, following his conversation with Roomba yesterday about times gone by, his father had decided to devote the entire day to sword training. The boy briefly indicated that he understood, and was ready. Then Mina stepped back sharply, causing the boy to cry out in surprise. She immediately moved aside, and he lost his balance and fell to the ground, where he remained. As he stood up, the boy told his father that he'd just tripped him and cautiously inquired if the training had been too rough today. The answer was a calm affirmation that it was nothing excessive. Alfred muttered that this must be punishment for what he said yesterday, and asked if his father was angry about the teasing nickname, noticing a strange dark smile on his face. The answer was a curt command to stand up immediately. Mina demanded that Alfred get up, and Mama Elena also supported him, urging him to hold on. He asked in surprise, wondering if she was on his side too. She declared that a mother's responsibility was to support the sweet boy, not his father, and noted that she was far less reserved. She then added that he was clearly hiding his true intentions and asked if that seemed odd. After this, Eleanor announced that this would be their last round and asked him to give it his all. The boy, relieved, agreed. The man explained that Eleanor was now fully focused on the fight with Roomba, and that gave him a chance. Meanwhile, Mina happily declared that she could finally spend the entire day as she pleased, and then suggested that she try to hit her father, warning that if she missed, her sword might accidentally hit him on the head. Alfred said that no matter how many times he was hit on the head, he would never forget that he was a dragon slayer. The swordsman replied that he would do the same and asked if he was teasing him. Mina noticed him suddenly go silent, and the boy asked if they should have a verbal duel. Then she turned and walked away, and he found himself on the ground again, his sword dropped. Lying down, the boy said he felt no pain, but had no idea what had happened. He admitted he hadn't noticed his father move at all and didn't understand how he'd been knocked down. The girl with the ponytail noticed that the sky was especially blue today, and the boy lying on the ground silently looked up as if he was seeing it for the first time. She reported that he had regained consciousness, while the man with the eye patch remained silent. The boy made soft sounds, finally waking up. He tried to figure out where he was and who he was, and then he remembered his name, Alfred, and his past life as Inaki Yuji. His morning training with his father came back to him, and he noted that he had a surprisingly good memory. Eleanor held him tightly and asked if he was okay and if anything hurt. Alfred assured her he was fine, and the chief immediately warned her not to shake him so hard. The girl admitted she was scared because Alf had a dead look in his eyes. The man replied that he'd had those eyes since birth, after which he contradicted himself. A man to the side asked if they were trying to pick a fight with him, and the girl replied. In the center, someone noticed that Al had finally woken up, and to the left, the boy thought of the worried faces he'd seen a moment ago and felt a sense of relief. At the end, the chief announced that since he had won their little match, he had the right to take the boy home with him the next day, and he would be his for the day. Mina screamed furiously, claiming she was terribly angry and couldn't understand why she hadn't landed a single blow when it mattered most. The guy inquired what was going on and asked if she was considering giving up. She immediately replied that that was out of the question and added that she was perfectly capable of continuing. She then reiterated that she would never admit defeat, insisting she had been heard perfectly. The man merely let out a questioning, "Oh," as if assessing her mood. Afterwards, he noticed that the little girl had a truly strong fighting spirit, and added that he expected nothing less from the daughter of a dragon slayer. The boy, breathing heavily, asked his father for a minute's rest. He said he'd count to 10, but the woman immediately intervened and insisted on at least 30. A man sitting nearby remarked that the difference between them now was like night and day. Rumba said the name quietly, after which the girl asked if it was really acceptable to let down one's guard so easily, and what would happen if she attacked at a moment when the opponent was completely open. The guy replied that he was being generous enough to give her time to catch her breath. Hearing this, the girl suddenly cried out, asking what the hell just happened. Mina demanded that they show her no mercy, declaring that she was no longer a child. The boss replied that he wouldn't do that, especially given the promise he'd made, and immediately asked if she was holding back too much. He then advised her to consider how to hone and integrate her agility into her attacks, using it as her primary advantage. Afterward, he asked if she thought it was possible to strike in her current, tired state. The chief continued, explaining that he had lived more than twice as long, and his seasoned body had accumulated far more experience and endurance. He added that reckless and thoughtless attacks would never achieve anything for a warrior like him. Rumba was silent for a moment, and then the girl remarked that he could look pretty cool sometimes, but it also made her angry. The man chuckled and admitted that such words made him embarrassed. Afterwards, she thanked him and said she was feeling fine now, then asked for another fight. He responded with a curt yes. The boss noticed that she might speak with such confidence, but he was sure her stamina was gradually wearing thin. He then added that in that case, everything was going as planned. Alfred suddenly proposed a small bet, explaining that the winner would be the one who struck first. The man with the eye patch asked again, clarifying what the bet was. The long-haired man explained that the winner would receive the privilege of spending the entire next day playing with the child. The girl with the sword immediately and enthusiastically accepted the offer, while the boy, looking confused, didn't immediately understand what was happening. After the fight, the man said she'd really given it her all and offered her a drink. She responded with frustration that she'd been so close to winning. The man with the armband calmly noted that that's how it happens. The girl clenched her fist and declared that she would definitely win next time, and he waved and said he'd see her tomorrow. She explained with displeasure that all the decisions had been made without her input and without even being informed. Then she asked where her word had been, and all she got in response was a distracted, "Yeah." Eleanor informed Alfred that food and water had been prepared for him and said she would leave them there. He thanked her and suddenly cried out. She immediately added that she could feed him herself if he didn't have the strength to eat yet. He replied that he could handle it himself for now, and the black-haired girl clearly expressed displeasure. At the end, the girl made an incomprehensible sound, and the guy asked Eleonora if she'd clicked her tongue. She immediately denied it, insisting nothing of the sort had happened, but he silently noted that her answer smacked of ill will. When a girl says, with visible irritation, that nothing happened, it almost always means the opposite. At such moments it's clear she's deliberately concealing her true intentions, and for the other person, this is a signal of impending trouble, even if everything appears calm on the surface. After this, she repeats that everything is fine, but then immediately admits that something is still bothering her, but she just doesn't want to talk about it. Then she again calls it a trifle, and the narrator makes it clear that it is not a trifle at all, but a carefully hidden discontent. Eleanor remarks that Alfredo should talk less and rest more, then asks ironically who's been doing the most talking. He calmly replies that he's leaving and sincerely thanks her for her concern. The girl waves goodbye to the man in the bed and walks down the hallway. Meanwhile he, remaining where he is, thinks with relief that there's finally silence, adding that he actually wanted Alfred to say "ah" so he could be fed too. Only then does he notice he can still hear her footsteps. Alfred sighs quietly and admits that, despite everything that happened, he's pleased to know that they genuinely cared about him. At that moment, a man with an eye patch and a girl appear nearby, listening attentively to his words. The man adds that he can also just stay home and do nothing on such a beautiful day, and that seems to him to be the best possible outcome. The chief confidently asserts that Alfred should have recovered his sanity by now after the concussion, and suggests they leave. Alfred explains that the blow had kept him inactive all day, and the next morning, Rumba himself came for him, wanting to explore the village and asking for a tour. He points into the distance and says the wheat fields stretch as far as the eye can see. The boy agrees, adding that the wheat, which is bright green now, will likely turn a beautiful golden color by autumn. The man reflects that the wheat always greets those entering the village with a warm welcome, and when they leave, it seems to see them off like a caring mother. The boy confirms this with a slight nod. The man then explains that bartering is common in these parts. The boy remembers that Triola mentioned this, agrees to continue on, and accepts the suggestion to head to the village square, where many people usually gather. The narrator notes that as one moves towards the center of the village of Kolijat, the buildings become denser and the streets narrower and busier, creating the feeling of a compact, well-organized space. It's generally accepted that new arrivals build houses and barns at some distance from the center. Depending on the nature of their shops and workshops, they are deliberately located either closer to the outskirts or, conversely, closer to the village heart. The man explains that forges are usually located on the outskirts of the village to avoid noise disturbance and make it easier to gather firewood. He adds that in Logan's case, living on the outskirts of the village was a voluntary choice, not a profession, while the woman clarifies that such workshops are often built in the most convenient locations. The chief adds that the houses in the central part belong mainly to old-timers and those employed in the service industry. He notes that the village appears quite lively and adds that if it were closer to the royal capital, even more people would flock here. The boy greets Herman-san, who in turn recognizes him as his young master. The woman explains that Herman-san is an acquaintance of her father's and then curiously asks who their companion is. The young man, with genuine admiration, admits he's never seen such craftsmanship. Then Alfred explains it's all about the design which he came up with himself. The man asks what it is, and the woman replies it's a village specialty, to which he nods in satisfaction. The boy notes that Roomba shows interest in literally everything, and with a slight smile thinks that perhaps this is exactly what a real adventurer should be like. The man, after tasting the food, says it's incredibly delicious and admits he thought he'd die of hunger. He then calls his interlocutor his savior, expressing his gratitude. The boy asks, perplexed, if anyone is seriously talking about starvation. The man asks if adventurers stock up on food or resupply in towns. He explains that he usually buys provisions in bulk when his supplies are low, but falters, and the man with the eye patch begins to explain how things really work. Finally, the chef turns his attention to two figures against the wall and asks if they're hungry. Alfred and Mina sit silently nearby, wrapped in blankets, watching the proceedings and enjoying a rare moment of peace. The boy said he found two children along the way who looked like they were starving, and he realized they needed food much more. So he gave them everything he had and walked the rest of the way empty-handed, while the child next to him just listened silently. After this, the man explained that he had barely made it to the village in that state, and that was why he had fallen asleep at his base, not having the strength for anything else. Then he burst out laughing and said he was finally enjoying some delicious spaghetti. The boy remained silent, then admitted he hadn't even suspected such a slum existed on the road to the village, after which he called out to Alfred. The boss noticed he was hungry and suggested they all go get something to eat. The guy agreed without hesitation, thinking it was a great idea. The man then asked if his interlocutor had any money and handed him a coin. He suggested they stop by Syria's diner and confidently declared that he had a whole gold coin today, so there was nothing to worry about. The man responded with surprise that he had actually found the money. The boss immediately explained that gold coins were rarely used here, and paying with them could be problematic. He asked if anyone was seriously considering paying in gold, and the man responded with a loud exclamation. The guy remarked that there probably wouldn't be any problems at Syria's diner. He added that the place had been doing quite well lately and wondered how she managed to make so much money. Then came the confident statement that everything would become clear once they got there, and the conversation died down for a while. When they arrived, a bearded man with dark hair remarked that the establishment was quite large. He explained that in other villages eateries were much more compact, but here they had to expand for certain reasons. The blond man immediately began to shout loudly, complaining that he'd lost again, and longingly recalled his tamagoyaki. Someone asked if something had happened to Roland-san, and Alfred replied that everything was going as usual. The woman explained that they were simply betting on side dishes during a game of reversey. The girl and the woman remembered that the man was the same one from the wheat fields and assumed his name was Roland-san. The guy remarked that first there was Logan-san, now it's Roland-san, and even though he's bad at reversey, he still enjoys it. He added that with that approach, it's no wonder he loses more often than not, and the man calmly admitted that he simply never learns from his own mistakes. The chef pointed to an object on the table and explained that it was a reversey counter, the reason the place remains so lively even at night. The man next to him listened attentively, showing interest. Then the man on the right added that thanks to reversey and shogi, the diner quickly became popular, prompting it to expand. The man on the left asked again what the games were, reversey and shogi. Mina explained that last year she transferred the rights to sell reversey to Treeson, and now the Slowlet family receives a percentage of every game sold. It sounded like a matter-of-fact business decision. The dark-haired man invited the fair-haired man to play a game of reversey, noting that it was his first time there. The blond man responded with interest. At the same time, the narrator noted that in this world, there is a patent system through which artisans of magical instruments can gain recognition for their work, although the life of the craft remains harsh. The man then began explaining the rules, demonstrating how to place the tiles and turn them over one by one. The man with the eye patch declared that he had grasped the gist of it and wouldn't have any trouble with these rules. The blond man echoed his sentiment with an approving comment. Afterwards they offered to place a bet order tamagoyaki. Alfred immediately considered taking advantage of the newcomer's inexperience. The woman asked what tamagoyaki even was, and the man replied that it wouldn't be surprising if she didn't know. The boy on the right pointed to a piece of tamagoyaki and claimed it as his. The boy next to him suggested they calm down, reminding them it was only a small piece. The prickly-haired man flared up and declared that if their tamagoyaki had been at stake, they would have spoken differently. Top right, a man with a bandage said he'd only take a tiny piece and immediately took a bite. Top left, a woman screamed loudly. Bottom, a man with a plate explained that he'd eaten the entire tamagoyaki, and another added that for such a big man it was definitely not a small piece. At the end, the blond man declared that they needed to finish the game of reversey first, but the man with the ponytail insisted on putting it off until later. Then he exclaimed with delight that the food was incredibly delicious and immediately asked for more. The man with the short hair declared that if anyone wanted to eat more tamagoyaki, they would have to defeat him first. The spiky-haired man immediately asked Alfred if he could drag his opponent into an alley and beat him up, but Alfred calmly clarified that he wasn't talking about winning a fight, but a game of reversey. The boss paused, looked closely at the board, and attempted to make a move, then snapped his fingers. He then looked up at the man and informed him that he had no further moves and would have to skip his turn. The man panicked, searching for a place for his piece, but finally, with a cry, admitted that he indeed had to skip his turn. Mama Elena noticed that Roland came here every day, and the boy automatically addressed her as Saria-san, as if it was more usual for him. The chef explained that if it's already so crowded after lunch, it'll be even worse at night. People drink a lot, it gets even busier, and fights break out constantly. Mina confirmed his words, adding that in such situations, the frail-looking man has to intervene and break up the fights. She admitted she hadn't known there were so many fights there and reacted sheepishly to the question about her condition. Sarah laughed, and it flashed through the man's mind that even her husband couldn't resist her. Mama Elena pointed ahead and said that's exactly how it happens. When an incident starts, her husband intervenes and simultaneously strikes. The boy next to her made a frightened, strangled sound. The woman on the right remarked that her movements were surprisingly fast and even frightening. The woman in the center added that if her husband gets out of control, it's the wife who puts him in his place. The woman on the left enthusiastically agreed, saying she reacts this way every time he looks at other women or runs away from work. Mama Elena asked Alfred to come over to her for a minute. The boy laughed and admitted he had no idea what was going on. Alfred said he'd wash the dishes then, and the man agreed. The next moment, Alfred was hit on the head with a cup and cried out in pain. The girl noticed that he still hadn't learned from his mistakes, and the boy merely nodded wearily and quietly uttered something like agreement. A voice called out to Roland from the left. The man with the eye patch wondered if the kid was an idiot, remembering how he'd made the same mistake the day before in his fight with his old man. The blonde man confirmed that everyone thought so. He then added that all the ideas the boy had come up with, aside from tamagoyaki and the square frying pan for him, were reversi and shogi. The man philosophically remarked that the difference between an idiot and a genius was extremely small, and that the answer to this question was one of the 7 mysteries of the village. He then asked what the other 6 were. The boy advised them to take their time and said they still had plenty of time. Someone demanded another drink, and another guy asked angrily why he had to do this. A week had passed since Roomba first arrived in the village. The narrator noted that from that moment on, they began charging him for his stay in their house. The chief declared his home base far more luxurious than any village inn. The boy thanked him and agreed that it was indeed a very comfortable place. The man explained that he had repeatedly refused to stay in their mansion because someone there was constantly disturbing his peace. The boy asked if it was right not to invite Eleonora today, adding that he had already told Nord about it. The girl replied that if they had taken the boy's sister with them, it would have been easier to destroy the prey by attacking from several sides simultaneously. The man explained that from now on the boy needed to suppress his presence as much as possible. The boy replied that he understood, then suddenly said something like, "Oops," and the man admitted he had a point. The man went on to explain that they had gone into the forest so he could witness Rumba's knowledge in action, as he wanted to learn from him as an adventurer. He described his steps as silent and devoid of any unnecessary movements. The guy noticed that his base was starting to run out of food and clarified that he wasn't kicking anyone out, it was just for today. At that moment, he spotted a rabbit and chased it, heading deeper into the forest. The girl threw a piece of wood at him, saying, "Take that," and he responded with a muffled groan. He continued moving almost silently, and the girl wondered in amazement how a man of his build could even move so quietly. The boy was concentrating on how to completely erase his presence, mentally comparing himself to Roomba. At that moment, the man's hand slowly dropped, as if he had sensed something disturbing. The boy cautiously asked if everything was okay. The man calmly replied that he felt a monster approaching. The boy was surprised and then heard a clarification: it was a goblin. The chief explained that encountering such a creature here meant only one thing: it had become separated from its group. He also noted that the forest around the estate was relatively safe compared to other places. But the deeper you went, the more often you encountered boars, monsters, and their lairs. He also mentioned that one of the feudal lord's duties was to protect these lands. The guy managed to say that it was a goblin when the creature suddenly rushed forward with obvious hostility. The man asked the boy if this was the first time he'd seen a monster. He replied that he had seen one before, but only from afar. The man said that it was a snow-white monster, a wind wolf, and as soon as he noticed it, he immediately rushed in pursuit. He added that after that incident he learned how his father had gone with a vigilante squad to suppress the goblin. His father was leading the squad, and he had clearly shown who was in charge. Then the man returned to the current situation, noting that the goblin was small and that goblins themselves were barbaric creatures. The chief suddenly suggested that Alfred try a sword fight. Alfred reacted with shock and reminded him that he was only 6 years old and his fencing record left much to be desired. The boy admitted that if he had any chance of winning, he'd have to use magic. The girl added that it was precisely that he specialized in. The man glanced ahead and noticed that they seemed to have already been spotted. The man warned the boy to keep his distance, explaining that the fight could quickly escalate into close combat. He gripped his massive weapon tightly, while the boy stood at a distance, watching tensely. The man called out to Alfred, asking what was going on. Alfred answered from a distance, saying he was there, and asking in surprise why he had gone so far away. The boy honestly admitted that the closer he got, the more terrified he became, and asked them not to consider him a coward. The man with the eye patch noticed that he had just returned and wondered why his sword was already sheathed. The boy noticed this and asked them to wait a second. The next moment, the man with the eye patch bared his teeth in a dangerous grin and rushed straight toward the boy. The boy wondered in amazement if they were really going to throw him straight into the fray. The boy loudly warned that he was about to cover Rumba with his magic and asked them to back away immediately to avoid being hit. The man with the eye patch cried out in surprise, noticing the scale of the attack. The guy looked at his hand, stained with purple blood, and calmly noted that it was definitely not human blood. He explained that he had gone hunting many times before, catching rabbits and wild boar. Protecting the people of his domain and providing them with food was the feudal lord's duty. According to him, this should be a simple and straightforward solution to the problem. At least, that was the original intent. The man remarked that the boy's magic could be described with the same eerie words. The boy thoughtfully agreed that it did indeed look rather grotesque. The man asked Roomba if he was serious. Roomba replied that he was absolutely serious, adding that using magic to improve his everyday life was quite enough for him. In the end, the man philosophically remarked that no matter what world a person lives in, the value of life always remains complex and not fully comprehended. The boy admitted that fighting wasn't for him, and the man calmly replied that that was exactly what he thought.